A warm welcome to everybody to the Integrated Environmental Health Sciences Seminar Series. This binary series welcomes members and guests of both the P30 Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors, CURES, and the P42 Center for Leadership in Environmental Awareness and Research, CLEAR, both funded by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. I'm Graham Parker, the leader of the Translational Research Support Corps of CURES, and it is my great pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker and TRSC collaborator, Dr. Shanique Brown, Assistant Professor of Management at the Zicklin School of Business, Baruch College, City University of New York. Shanique's research is focused on understanding how information processing and decision-making impact how individuals function and perform within teams. Shanique's training in industrial organizational psychology saw her achieve a master's from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and then a doctorate from DePaul University, Chicago, before being invited to join the faculty in the Department of Psychology here at Wayne State University. She joined the management department at Baruch College in 2024, but has retained her collaborative association with CURES. Shanique has won numerous awards and fellowships for teaching, and her expertise in group dynamics, theory, research, and practice, which is exemplified by her presentations on collaborations with practitioners, community engagement, self-evaluation and perceived organizational support, knowledge integration in interdisciplinary teams, and using the science of teams to support team science. The science of team science provides a robust framework of best practices and tools to support the development and success of research teams and CURES. In this interactive session, Dr. Shanique Brown will engage us with her presentation, Optimizing Collaboration, Strategies for Effective Team Science. Shanique?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Graham. And thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited to be talking about team science. May I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So as Graham mentioned, I will be talking about ways to optimize collaboration in team science today. Now, I want to make a note that while I have studied for now 10 years work groups and teams, I will spend the time today not talking about my own research, but talking about research as well as best practices that we see in the team science space in support of or from the science of team science space in support of team science. So I'd first like to start by getting to learn a bit about those who are in the audience today. I've designed a quick Menti poll with 2 questions. The first asking you if you are engaged, and if so, how you're engaged in team science. And the second, asking you to share with me and us what you believe the greatest strength of your current science team is. You may scan the QR code on the screen. I've also shared the link on the slide as well. So I'll pause just for a minute to give you a moment to respond, and we'll take a look at your responses shortly. Okay, thank you for sharing your responses. So as you can see, most of those who are here with us are familiar with team science and are currently engaged in team science. We have several who are leading science teams, so that's great to know. And I'm also intrigued by the response here of what is team science. So welcome to the conversation today. Hopefully by the end of this session, we will be very clear in our understanding about team science. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was checking the chat. And then the second question, oh, there you go. If you're part of a science team, what is the greatest strength of your current team? I think, yes, if the Mentimeter isn't working, please, as Lynn mentioned, go ahead and share that in the chat. Okay, thank you. So from where I'm sitting, it looks like listening was shared a few times, or at least twice. It looks larger than the others to me, so that's good to see that there is some convergence in the responses and in terms of what is working well in your current team. I'm curious to hear just briefly from someone who shared listening. I'd like to hear or find out from you how that is supported or fostered in your team. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, so I think of our community advisory board and our co-chair specifically that we work with and integrate into our monthly team meetings. And so is your question how we're using that information?
Oh, good question. So my question is, how do you foster this environment where people are listening?
Oh, well, a good question. Well, they help us actually decide what our priorities are. And so we do agenda setting with them as part of our process, and not just holding the meetings, but making sure that what we're doing in our monthly meetings, there's time for everybody to have a voice in that. It is a smaller team. There's only about 5 of us. And so also making enough space that when we did have like 3 co-chairs, for example, we did extend the time to an hour and a half monthly to meet because there were just too many of us.
Okay.
So also making, I guess, like the space for it.
Okay, absolutely. And that is so important, being intentional and making space for others to share their thoughts. That will come up again later in the presentation. And from the responses here, thank you so much for sharing that, Carrie. From the responses here, I'm seeing some commonalities in terms of the themes, right? So there are things that are helping your teams in terms of behaviors that you're engaged in. There's some cognitive aspects, so an interdisciplinary mind, I love that term, as well as flexibility, curiosity. Very, very helpful responses here to help to frame my thinking in terms of what's working for the teams that you're engaged in. Okay, let me go back to my slide here. Okay, well, thank you so much for your participation. I will call on you again to hear your thoughts as I go through the presentation. So I'm sharing on the slide here both a quote and some data related to trends that we're seeing. And I'm sure this is probably not surprising to many of you in the room. The idea that science is a collaborative effort, and that pattern of collaboration, that practice of collaboration has increased over the decades. We're seeing a few patterns here, as you're seeing in the graphs, that more publications are being published, or more papers are being published with multiple authors. We're seeing that the authorship size, or the team size of the authorship group has or is increasing. We're seeing that this is specific to neuroscience here on the slide, but this is across the board. Grants are being funded, or more multi-PI grants are being funded now than in the past. And these are interesting data. This is an interesting idea, right? That research and science is more collaborative in nature. But I think what is even more interesting and more relevant to the value and the importance of team science, it's something that is not quantitatively different in terms of patterns, but something that's qualitatively different. The idea or the fact that science and research currently is increasingly tackling these very complex issues and challenges that we face as a society. Some call them wicked problems, others social messes or grand challenges, but issues and challenges that are so complex that they often require and need expertise from multiple disciplines. And so what that means is that typically creates a situation or teams where we see quite a bit of diversity in terms of expertise, professional expertise, but it also means that, and especially in those teams, the transdisciplinary teams, for example, we go a bit beyond just collaborating. We go, or we are required to interact and engage in deeper knowledge integration in our teams. And so that creates some challenge for folks who are working in teams and conducting science. Now, before I get into the specifics of what I'll be covering today, I want to provide just a few definitions of terms that I will use to make sure that we're all on the same page as I refer or use these terms. So team science refers to research that is done collaboratively. And so this may involve multidisciplinary research or cross-disciplinary research. And within cross-disciplinary research, we have different types of ways that the disciplines might interact. They might interact in an interdisciplinary way, meaning that there's some integration, or they might interact in a transdisciplinary way, meaning that there's even more integration, and the product that's being created ultimately is far beyond any single discipline. And so collaborative research projects or science teams is the term team science is the term I use to reflect or to represent or to describe those teams. The science of teams involves or relates to the study of teams and what makes teams effective. And this is where I position myself in terms of where my research would fit. I, as an organizational psychologist trained as a behavioral scientist, I study teams and what makes teams effective. And as Greg mentioned, how teams work together to integrate their knowledge. Much of this literature is or started in the social psychology space and has evolved over time, where we're seeing more of, or most of the science of teams research being conducted in organizational psychology and in the management disciplines. And then the science of team science, some describe this as a meta-science of team science, but it is a new subfield of the science of teams that focuses specifically on understanding and developing interventions and strategies for team science specifically. So yes, there is a pretty robust body of literature from the science of teams that applies generally to a wide range of teams. However, team science presents some unique features, and so there's certainly value in exploring or understanding how those characteristics or the specific characteristics and challenges that team science faces, understanding those with a more context-specific perspective. And so the science of team science was developed to focus more specifically on team science and supporting team science. briefly here. I know this is probably a bit difficult to read, but this is describing or illustrating somewhat the history of the science of team science. First, I guess the birth of the science of team science is attributed to an NIH roadmap that was created in 2005. That's when discussion started about team science, or first started about team science. And then by 2010, the International Network for the Science of Team Science had their first conference and has been having those conferences as years have gone by. As that has occurred, we've seen more publications, more development in the literature specific to team science and what helps to support the success and the effectiveness of teams working collaboratively to conduct science. Now, I mentioned earlier that team science has some unique characteristics. And so here are a few examples of or a few features that make team science a bit different from what we would traditionally see in work groups. And this is not to say that other teams may not share these features, but these are some unique features of team science. So the first has to do with diversity. And this primarily is in reference to diversity in terms of disciplinary representation, right? So as I mentioned before, and the team science or science teams working on team science are typically diverse in terms of disciplinary background. And so that presents a challenge, right? Especially for transdisciplinary teams who are, in order to be successful, need to engage in some deep knowledge integration, right? To be able to produce a solution or an outcome that extends beyond any single discipline. It means that we need to be pulling in and integrating between our disciplines. And that's not something that is typical of or average team, right? So it takes quite a bit of effort and intentionality to make that possible and to make that as seamless as possible. Team science usually or sometimes may involve very, very large teams. The Manhattan Project is a very extreme example, but I've seen that project included up to 500,000 people, right? So not typical of our average team science, but it's possible that these teams might be very large in size. And so again, that creates a challenge because what we know from the team composition literature is that it's best to keep our teams as small as possible. Yes, there are times when we need to have a much larger team, but a team is a lot more manageable when the size is small. Goal alignment, or we might see some misalignment in team science. And this may occur especially if we have what's called a multi-team system, right? Where we have a team of teams working together. So if we are seeing a collaboration between different institutions, each institution may have their own team. And so that creates a system of teams working to collaborate together. And so that can be quite complex. Team science is also characterized by permeable boundaries, meaning people are coming in and out, right? As people transition between organizations, transition between projects. And so that is a challenge that is worth being mindful of and considering as we try to support scientists working on team science. Geographic dispersion is another, as well as high task interdependence. And task interdependence becomes higher, especially in our interdisciplinary and our transdisciplinary teams that are working to integrate ideas, right? In order to be able to do that, we will see a situation where we're highly interdependent. We rely very heavily on each other. Okay, so stepping back a bit to the science of teams, I'm sure a structure like this, an input mediator model, output model is very familiar to many of you. This is used in the organizational team literature to summarize what we know about teams. And so generally speaking, we know that in order for teams to be successful or effective, which is our outcome, we have factors or conditions that or input factors that go into the team. So we have our people, right? Our teams are composed of people who might be different in terms of their ability level, their expertise, demographic characteristics, their personality, their values. We have these people who are existing in the team who are embedded within the structure of the team, which may involve features such as interdependence, different leadership structures, the extent to which they're virtual versus not, training, the extent to which they've received training, the type of training they've received. And then these teams are also embedded within larger organizations, which have as well their own characteristics. And so we consider these factors as factors that help to shape what our teams look like. However, what helps to enable our teams to be successful are these mediating factors or mediators that usually help to convert or input factors to effectiveness. And our mediators include behaviors, specific behaviors that team members may engage in, what we call team processes, as well as emergent states. These are conditions that develop as people interact. So for example, trust and cohesion, these aren't things that I take to the team. These are things that emerge as I engage with my team members or do not emerge. We have emergent states that might be affective in nature, meaning more emotion or mood related, but we also have emergent states that might be cognitive in nature, so shared mental models and our transactive memory, which has to do with knowing who knows what within the team, who to go to for particular expertise. And so in order for us to enable these emergent states to develop, we need to engage in certain behaviors and practices. And at the end here, we have our output, which is usually how effective the team is. And in most situations, the priority is often given to task completion. So are we completing our task in a timely manner at good quality? But team effectiveness also involves how satisfied our members are, as well as viability. So the extent to which people would have a desire to work together in the future. And so generally speaking, and I've just presented a few examples, but I share this to make the case or to highlight that there are countless factors that are relevant to the effectiveness of teams. And today I will, as I talk about team science, I will focus only on three. And I've selected three that I believe are or three of the ones that are perhaps most important for team science. But there's a quite robust body of literature supporting other actions, strategies, interventions, or considerations that need to be taken when we think about teams and what helps teams to be effective. So today I will talk about two development or team development interventions. One is training that focuses on skill development. The other is debriefing, which focuses on process development. And I'll also talk about one of the team states, that's one of the emergent conditions, which is psychological safety. Right, so team training. Does it work? Well, what is team training? So when we refer to team training, I'm talking about formalized learning experiences that focus on the development of specific competences or skills within a team. I'm not referring to team building, which is often used, the term is often used interchangeably, and many organizations often engage in team building instead of team training. Team building is quite different from team training. So our team building is going to be our ropes course and hanging out with each other in the mountains, getting to know each other. Those exercises definitely have their place in terms of, or specifically in terms of clarifying roles within a team, so people get to know each other and are clear about their roles. However, team building doesn't necessarily result in improvement or growth in terms of competencies. And there is also a robust body of literature on team training and its effectiveness across the board. We see several meta-analyses, and I have just a sample of those that have been done in different contexts. So general meta-analysis generally of the team training literature, more specific to healthcare. There's another example there, and then there's or two examples that are a bit more specific to healthcare. But overall, the evidence is that team training works. In fact, in summary, Ed Salas and colleagues have concluded and found that effective team training often results in an improvement of approximately 7% in terms of team performance, attributed specifically to team training. But that's contingent on how the training is done. And so in order for training to be effective, it's helpful or necessary to engage in what's called a training needs analysis to determine what specific skills need to be developed and for whom those skills need to be developed. So being very clear about what training is needed is an important step. Carefully designing the training to match the needs and the circumstances of those who are being trained, and then evaluating the training to determine its success to inform future interventions or training. So training is effective in terms of helping to support the development of team skills. When we talk about team skills can be focused on both the task that the team is working on as well as the teamwork aspect of the team. So in team science, we or science teams are usually include members who are very who are with high expertise within their specific domain. Team training focuses on or will focus on any specific or generic task that the team needs to engage in. So tasks that might be generic in nature, are tasks that a team, like if you learn that task for this team, then you can carry it over, transfer it to other teams. So we have our tasks can be generic or our tasks can be specific, and our team skills can be specific or generic. And so this creates this 2x2 structure here, where we have team contingent skills. Those are skills that are generic to the task, but specific to the team. So that could mean things like understanding the characteristics within your team, learning how to provide guidance to your team members, and working on building cohesion. We have those competencies or skills that might be specific to the task as well as specific to the team. So understanding the team's objectives, learning any particular or new analyses that's necessary. And building the team's collective efficacy, which will be its overall or collective confidence in pursuing or conducting or completing the task that it needs to complete. And then we have our task contingent skills. Those are specific to the task but generic to the team. And then our transposable, both generic to the task as well as generic to the team. And so those skills are skills that can be transferred to different teams as well as to different tasks. So how, sorry, I'm just checking my time to make sure I'm on track here. So how do we engage in the in team science skills training? I just have a few examples here of ways to do that. So there is first the collaboration team science field guide that is a helpful resource, and it is publicly and freely available. It's developed by the NCI. And so that document includes information about team science as well as a series of scenarios that are helpful or useful for thinking about some typical challenges or issues that a team might face or a science team might face, and how to navigate or encouraging discussions about how to navigate some of those challenges. So a very, very useful and comprehensive guide. In terms of more experiential or interactive team science skills training, we see we can see a range of ways to do this. So places like Johns Hopkins and the Georgia CTA has a similar structure in terms of having a skills training, team science skills training series similar to this seminar that we're doing right now, where they have speakers coming in, but the speakers are speaking specifically to team science skills. And so they have a range of topics that are relevant to some of the team effectiveness factors that I spoke about before, but those are targeted specifically to team science. The University of Texas Medical Branch recently launched an online training program called Team Maps, and it's based on developing these three main categories of competence. So building awareness and exchange, psychological safety, and adaptation and correction. And this is a self-paced course that scientists can complete on their own. I believe at the end they get a certificate of completion. And this is or was developed by team science experts, science of team science experts rather, who have scoured the literature and kind of condensed it to these three main categories of competencies that they believe are most important in the context of team science. So awareness and exchange, right? Sharing unique information, which it sounds like an obvious thing. Yes, we should share unique information, but what the literature really shows us is that whenever we're in situations, or most times when people are in situations where, or in teams where they hold unique information, like disciplinary diverse teams, many times people hold on to the unique information and share the shared information, which is counterintuitive, but that is a reality that's there's evidence to support that. And so being intentional about encouraging the sharing of information, as Carrie shared that example earlier, making space for sharing is important. Psychological safety, which I'll talk about as well, has been acknowledged as one of those key states that is helpful, especially in the team science context. And then monitoring or debriefing, so helping a team to be more adaptive and be able to engage in corrective actions. That's their third level of competencies. And then the UCLA has, I like this, I pulled on this because they are very intentional about community engagement. And so they've been able to, or they have they initially had a team science training program, and they recently rescoped that to ensure that it includes a community engagement component, so that the scenarios and the problems that they're discussing involve building that those competencies that are relevant to working with members of the community. So that's a great example. They also have a year-long fellowship program, as well as a one-day team training seminar. Another example comes from the University of Florida Health, and this one is unique because as well as UCLA, they integrate students in the training, and so they developed a training program a few years ago, which they're now providing or sharing data in terms of its effectiveness, where they created both classroom training as well as experiential activities, and they partner students with co-mentors to build collaborative relationships or partnerships and conduct science together. And they've found that this has resulted in increases in, or is associated with, increases in self-efficacy of related to clinical research skills. So people feel more confident in their clinical research skills. They've found that it has changed or increased the frequency of participation in cross-disciplinary collaborations, not just for the students, but also for the co-mentors that are involved in the program. And they're seeing some behavioral changes as well, yes, where some intentions and some behavioral trainings where co-mentors are intending to engage in more collaboration, and they're using collaboration tools like written collaboration plans and authorship agreements as a result of the training that they were engaged in. So I'll pause briefly just in case anyone has questions before I transition to the discussion of debriefing. Okay, so training focuses on developing specific skills. Debriefing is also a team development tool or intervention, but it's focused more so on the behaviors or process that the team engages in. So it's a dedicated process to help to support the development of a team. I highlight here some scholars who believe that it's one of the most promising methods for supporting learning from experience within a team. And debriefing essentially involves pausing to have a discussion about how the team is, or it's really a monitoring tool to understand how things are going in the team, what's going well, what's not going well, and having discussions about changes that can be helpful for the team. And so we have best practices. I have some posted on the slide here about things to do before a debrief, during and after a debrief. And so before a debrief, we want to sell the value of a debriefing exercise, why we're doing it, and what we hope to gain from it. We want to engage that people understand why it's helpful or why it's useful, how it could be useful. And then during a debrief, we want to try to focus on both teamwork as well as task work. Tell or talk about, we want to avoid telling people what to do rather than discussing, so ensure that we're engaging in discussion. I won't read through all of these, but we want to ensure that we're creating a safe space for people to engage in the action or the process of debriefing, and then we want to make sure that we're following up. And in terms of its effectiveness, there is evidence suggesting that teams that debrief are up to 20% or over 20% more effective than teams that do not engage in debriefing. And so in terms of examples, debriefing as a technique for team development has been quite heavily used in multiple contexts, especially very high stakes contexts, such as the military, in healthcare. And we've seen quite substantial benefits of debriefing. So some might be familiar with the after action review that's done in the military. There's also the guided self-correction, which is another tool that's used in the military. And I have just examples of, or an example of what that might look like. So providing, usually when you're doing a debrief, you're focusing on a specific event. So you would summarize the event, so what happened. Again, talk about why you're doing the debriefing, and then engage in a discussion. So calling on specific examples of things that went well, how that helped the team, things that did not go so well, and what impact that may have had on the team. And in terms of the evidence supporting debrief, as I mentioned, I just have here a few examples, but engaging in debriefing can result in, and this is evidence from the military specifically, but it can help to enhance the mental models that a team holds. And a mental model is a mental representation that an individual holds about a given situation, so the team's task, for example. And so in teams, we want to make sure that this is shared to some extent. And so when a team has shared mental model, they have a shared understanding of their task or whatever the concept is. But we also want to make sure that mental models are accurate. And so debriefing can help to ensure that a team has more accurate mental models. Debriefing can also help to ensure that teams have are able to engage in the processes or the behaviors that are necessary to support their effectiveness. So it can help to enhance leadership behaviors and help to enhance supportive behaviors in teams. So in the example here, one of the questions that was used in the military is, can someone describe a time when backup was provided for one teammate from one teammate to another? And so backup is something that, yes, we see in the military, but we can also see in our team science. It's where a team member is not able to complete a task for some legitimate reason, they're ill, they have some conflict, someone might step in and complete that task for that person. And so engaging in debriefing can help to create or enhance or support these behaviors. And then debriefing is also, or has been shown to be related to performance outcomes. So in this example, more accurate assessments of a situation, which is very, very critical in a context like the military. All right. So with that, I will now transition to a state, right? So I talked earlier about team states being these emergent conditions. They're not behaviors, they're things that we do. They're things that emerge in teams as people interact, but they can emerge as a result of the behaviors and the things that and the activities that we engage in, or the processes that we engage in as a team. And so psychological safety is, I think it's very well represented in our society. There are quite a bit of discussion about psychological safety, and it's relevant and important to all teams, but especially, I would say, and others would say, to team science. And so before we do that discussion, I'm going to pause here and hear from you. I'm sharing here a fictitious case, full disclosure, developed with help from ChatGPT. Just an example here of a situation that we're seeing, or you could potentially see in a science team context. And I won't read this. I'll give you a moment to read it, and then let's talk briefly about what this doctor, the PI, could do to balance the need for constructive criticism while maintaining a positive and inclusive team environment. So I'll give you a minute to read it, and then we can talk briefly about it. Okay. What are your thoughts? What can this PI do to balance the need for constructive criticism while also maintaining a positive team environment? What are your thoughts, and what from your experience has worked well for you, if you've been faced with a similar situation like this? Yes, Carrie.
I guess I'll be the person that keeps raising their hands and up. So the thing that comes to mind for me, Shanique, is we set operating norms at the beginning of our meetings where we know there's going to be, it's kind of a power leveling strategy, right? To encourage people to participate and establish that it's a safe place and that everybody's input is welcome. And so it's something we do when we, at the beginning of bringing diverse teams together as a strategy. But that's not after the fact, that it's already happening, but you're hoping to prevent it as a level setting in advance.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So operating norms, I think, was a term you used. Yeah, I like that. So thank you for sharing that. And then in the chat, the 6 thinking hats methods is effective. I have not heard of that. I will definitely take a look at that. Graham, go ahead.
I think it's interesting in your example that the more, or the person that should be the less experienced researcher is making a very specific statement about a process, a scientific process, whereas the person that's supposed to be the more experienced scientist is making basically a political statement. And I think what the PI has to address the fact that what looks like a conversation isn't a conversation. They're talking about two very, very different things, and there's two different spheres that need to be addressed without trying to address it as if it is a question asked and a question answered, because they're not speaking the same language.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Yeah, and I like that, Graham, and it also makes me think about different ways that teams of scientists may be different in terms of its composition. These differences in level or power, right? Which also makes things can also complicate the team dynamics. But also in your response, there's this perspective that I actually hadn't thought about in terms of the fact that these are two different like ways of seeing an issue and interpreting an issue, with which the PI would be the best person to try to address and kind of integrate. Yeah, so that's an interesting observation. Thank you. Okay. All right. So psychological safety, which I share here Amy Edmondson's term, permission for candor. And Amy Edmondson is a person who developed or identified this construct while doing her dissertation. And it has just blossomed, and research related to psychological safety has increased quite substantially, and we're seeing it in the media quite a bit. So psychological safety has to do with a shared understanding within a group that it's okay, it's acceptable for us to be able to express our ideas and our concerns and speak up, and also to admit our mistakes without having any fear of consequences. It is not about being nice. It's also not necessarily a comfortable thing to experience, or it doesn't create necessarily a comfortable space or environment. And comfortable is okay. Many times we are able to advance or find that we're able to advance and grow in those moments of discomfort. And so psychological safety can, or psychologically safe environment can and will often be one that is uncomfortable at times. So we want to be able to recognize that because we're psychologically safe, it doesn't mean that it's a comfortable situation or experience. There is, or has been, as I mentioned, quite a robust body of literature on psychological safety and its benefits. It helps to support other emergent states. So helps to support or is associated with increases in engagement and motivation within a team. It's also been shown to be related to better decision making, because if we're in a psychologically safe space, we are more comfortable sharing different perspectives. And when we share those perspectives and work through them, we often are able to make better collective decisions. Psychological safety is also associated with improved learning within teams. Now, there's an HBR article that I came across recently, and I've just borrowed snippets from that to add to this slide. When we think about, again, or science teams, which are diverse in terms of disciplinary background, and as we just highlighted, may be different in terms of levels of authority or levels of power or levels of years of experience. These teams are often diverse, especially teams that are more on the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary space where people need to be interacting. And the truth is that when we have situations or cases where teams are diverse, it can be a bit challenging, right? It can be uncomfortable. It can hamper performance. And so from the single study by Edmondson and colleague of 62 drug development teams, what they found is that in diverse teams, we see more breakthrough performance for those teams that are psychologically safe. So those teams here. So on this axis, we have low and high performance and low and high diversity. So teams that are very diverse, they're kind of here in the middle. Some are kind of low in performance, but when teams, and the red dots represent the teams that were psychologically safe, they tended to do much better than the teams that did not have a psychologically safe environment or context. And so the takeaway from this for me is that when we're working in these complex teams where diversity is necessary and required, it's even more important that we are creating that psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable and are willing to share their unique ideas and even mistakes, because we can learn from them. So how do we create a psychologically safe environment? There are multiple tips that we see and suggestions that we see in the literature of interventions that work. I pull this one from that same article. The three main categories of behaviors that we can engage in. We can think about how we're framing or team experience and our time together, right? So meetings, for example, we can frame those as opportunities for information sharing. Often our meetings are where we provide updates, right? So if we frame our meetings as an opportunity for sharing information, then people would enter the meeting being more open and willing to share. We can frame our differences as a source of value, right? So there's a reason we have this particular mix of expertise in the team. Be sure to frame it in terms of what contribution or value that person's expertise offers for the team and the science that we're doing in the team. Inquiry is another category of strategies that we can use. So asking open-ended questions and using questions that build ownership and causality. So trying to take ownership for a situation that may have gone, that may have been difficult. What did I do to put you in this challenging situation? How can I help? And then third, bridging boundaries, which can be very difficult in knowledge diverse teams for a variety of reasons. We may find that we have different challenges based on our expertise or different objectives based on our expertise. And so finding ways to intentionally bridge those bridges, calling out or trying to understand what each person's objectives are and what their challenges are, and finding ways to build connections will be helpful in terms of supporting psychological safety. All right, so earlier in the presentation, I mentioned or highlighted the team effectiveness model, the input, the mediator, and the output factors. And I mentioned that there is a wide range of input factors and mediating factors that can help to support the effectiveness of teams, and that some of that can be, or some of those are relevant and very useful to team science, and some more than others. The field guide from the National Cancer Institute highlights these 10 that they say are top 10 takeaways or top 10 issues that are relevant in team science or relevant to team science. And so if you are interested in exploring this, it's a really useful or really comprehensive guide. These are the 10 that they highlight as most relevant. The strategies that I talked about, team training, debriefing, and psychological safety, can help to support or help to enhance or encourage some of these top 10 takeaways that have been identified, things like trust, self-awareness, leadership. It can benefit also as well from team training and debriefing, communication, conflict and disagreement. I didn't speak about explicitly today, but that's also very, very, very critical and important whenever we think about, or whenever we're working in teams and when we're working in disciplinary diverse teams. And so I just wanted to share this with you in case anyone is interested in exploring that further. And then I want to close with one final question. I'm curious if there are team science topics or one topic that you believe your team, since most of you are working or involved in team science, is there one or are there team science topics that you would benefit from learning more about? You are free to respond. I won't share that in the interest of time, but you can complete that if something is on your mind that you'd like to share. And then, sorry, I'm switching because of time. My final slide here has a list of team science resources, links to those, and I'm happy to share this in an email if that's more useful. So the International Network for the Science of Team Science, Insights, they actually have a conference coming up. Their conference is this summer. They do have that annual conference. And so that is sometime in July. And then I have a few other resources from the National Cancer Institute, the National Academy of Science, NCBI, and so forth. So if I'm, as I said, I'm happy to share those. And so with that, I'll stop and open for questions if we have 2 minutes. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, but feel free.
Thank you so much, Shanique. Has anybody got a burning question that they would like to ask that they can ask in less than 90 seconds?
I'll jump in there. Loved your talk. I'm curious about the concept of coaching in with respect to team science, because I've seen some interesting articles about coaching for professional athletes and musicians. Should we all have coaches? And that's kind of an interesting team dynamic. So has that ever come up, the concept of coaching in your work?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely comes up. And in fact, in the last 5 years, this field of coaching has just blossomed quite significantly. And so in terms of teams, yes, team coaching is also the Institute of Coaching Federation does have modules that are specific to teams and coaching teams. And so in terms of team science coaching, yes, there are some institutions that do offer that for their within their translational institute coaching for team science. And that's one of the other ways that we can work on team development beyond training.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Lara Chimo Spears has asked a question in the chat, Shanique, if we have time. She wants to know whether the team science field has evaluated the ideal balance between advocacy and inquiry on the ladder of inference. Oof, wow, that's a lot of buzzwords.
To shorten that, Graham, a little bit, it used to be in the business world, they talked about the ideal balance of the number of inquiring open-ended questions, the balance of those to advocating statements being something like 3-to-1 to 10-to-1. Like if you had too many of one, it was too much of a yes person kind of culture. And if you had too much advocacy, then it was a toxic culture. So some of my knowledge on this is kind of related to that area. I don't know. It seems like it relates to that psychological safety and like where do you, in science, you have a lot of assumptions that you're basing, you're moving, full steam ahead based on a lot of assumptions. And how does that translate into the, science field?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To my knowledge, I'm not familiar with that in the team science space, but I'm sure it, and I haven't also explored that in the science of teams, but I think that there's certainly, as you're mentioning, and there is an opportunity to explore that, and I see the value in that being a relevant question in team science. So thank you for that question, and I'm curious now. I'm going to take a look to see what I can find.
Thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Shanique, I've put your email address in the chat room because obviously it's an email address they're not familiar with, so that people can reach out to you. We truly value Shanique's expertise. Team science is such a buzz phrase that gets thrown around so easily. So to have an expert on tap is a privilege that we truly appreciate. Lynn, I think we're nearly up on time, aren't we? So if everybody could join me in thanking Shanique for a fascinating presentation, and we look forward to following up and finding out how she can help everybody's science get improved. Thank you very much, Shanique.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Just in case you're interested, for our next week, we have Dr. Hillary Maruzak from here at Wayne State University. We're going to go over adolescent mental health in context. Might be a good idea to share my screen for that. So that's what we can expect next week, and you can see our roster for the rest of this season. A lot of interesting talks coming up. So be sure to join us next Thursday, the 13th, same time, 12:30. To hear what Dr. Maruzak has to say. Thanks for joining, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Brown.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you all for your attention.
Bye. Have a good day,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.